So before I share any slides, I'd just like to say welcome to everybody to this workshop looking at the impact of the EU CTR on TMF reference or the TMF content and process. I'm joined by two co-hosts, Russell and Martina. I could put the slides up, but actually what I'll do is I'll just say, let's do some introductions of ourselves first. And then I'll go in and talk about what we're going to cover today. So for those of you who don't know me, my name is Karen Roy. I am the Chief Strategy Officer at Flex Global. I'm also the co-founder and co-chair and chair of the TMF reference model. And I am absolutely not an expert in the EU CTR, but I do know the TMF reference model reasonably well. And so one of the drivers for today is really because so many people have been asking so many questions about the impact of the EU CTR on the TMF reference model and on the process. We thought, well, let's just try and bring all the brains together. So that's me. Martina, would you like to introduce yourself?
I'm Martina Duevel. I'm in the TMF reference model group since a couple of years when I implemented the eTMF at Bayer. I'm a project leader, so I'm not one in the TMF area all the time, but I've still kept always some connection because I think it's too much fun. And I have more topics which have a touch point with TMF. Like this time I'm leading the EU CTR implementation at Bayer, and when the topic came up, I thought I might help you.
Thank you very much, Martina. And Russell?
Hello, I'm Russell Joyce. I'm a freelance information governance consultant. I've been working in the pharmaceutical industry since, oh gosh, I think about 2003, 2004. I'm also a director of the Health Sciences Records and Archives Association. Until this year, I was also a member of the TMF Reference Model Steering Committee. I think I've been invited to this because I actually wrote a position paper for the Health Sciences Records and Archives Association back in 2015 on the impact of Regulation EU 536/2014 on records management in the clinical space. And that, in essence, forms in some part the basis of the presentation today. So thank you for the invitation, Karen.
It's an absolute pleasure. So, and welcome to everybody else. Just a quick reminder, if you wouldn't mind, please putting your company name. To do that, you click on the three dots, click on rename, and it just means that we can see which companies people are from, and hopefully we'll get some good conversations going. So without further ado, I am going to share my screen and talk through, 1 second. Let's share this screen and stick it onto slideshow from the beginning. Whoopsie, not that one even. That's just so we know we have some right timing. Okay, so can everybody see my screen okay?
It's fine, Karen.
Yep, thank you.
Yes.
Right, I'm going to do one other thing very quickly, which is just put my Teams onto mute, because you know what happens when you're doing these things. Somebody inevitably sends you silly messages. Right, okay, so you've met all of us, although I love Russell's picture. And I'm going to ask you a story about that at some stage, Russell, but not for today. So you met all of us. The most important thing that I want you guys to get from this introduction is Russell and I are not dealing with the EU CTR. Martina is leading a group at Bayer who are looking at the EU CTR implementation. Our job between the three of us is absolutely not to be educating you. This is for all of us to be talking to each other, and we have some targets for today that we want to try and get to the end of, but this is about sharing information. So hopefully you've all brought information from your companies to this meeting so that we can all benefit from it. So the aims, there is going to be, Martina's very kindly going to do us a very brief introduction to the EU CTR and the CTIS. We are going to be asking some questions about collation and tracking of CTIS documents. And one of the key reasons is the impact on the TMF, not just the TMF reference model, but the content and the process as well. But probably the most important thing we're going to be doing is trying to understand new or changed documents. Now, we've got a list of things that we're going to go through. We may have forgotten some, you may have different, from all my discussions so far, it's been very clear that there's a lot of grey areas and a lot of questions. You know, the whole discussion about for publication versus not for publication, and what do you put in the TMF and what don't you put into the TMF. And what we want to come out of today with is, what are the new or changed documents? Are there any new artifacts needed? Are there any new sub-artifacts needed in our minds? Identifying any process changes. So we're going to have a discussion about archiving right at the very end. And then actually pull together this. So one of the reasons we're recording, and just to remind everybody, we are recording, is I'm going to try and talk my one of the guys in our marketing department who's very good at taking content. I'm going to try and talk him into turning this into a white paper for the TMF reference model, so that we can actually have something that when we get asked the question for the 70 millionth time, what's the impact of the EU CTR on the TMF reference model, we can give them a white paper to start off with and then take it from there, because we have been asked the question so many times. And we're very pleased to have Layla on. Layla is one of the co-chairs of the Change Control Board for the TMF reference model. And obviously what we're going to do from all of this is we're actually going to feed this information through to the Change Control Board. So if we do have some suggested changes, it then goes through the formalized process of the reference model. I would love you all to be quite chatty and commenty. I definitely don't want to be the only one talking. However, I'm going to talk to start off with, so that's okay. What I did was put together a poll, which I need to find on my screen here, a poll. I'm going to launch the first poll. Would you mind, and I would really appreciate, I can't even see how many people we've got on at the moment, because I'm showing my screen, but I would really love it if you could all please answer the polls, 58 people. If you could all please answer the polls, because I think it's going to give us some very valuable information. And once everybody's answered the polls, Russell, can you do me a favor and just take a screen grab of the answers, please, once I publish them?
Yep.
And I think this will be very useful information, not just for us, but for you inside your companies as well. So if your company is not doing anything, it will give you, well, look, there's 58 different companies. Here's the list of companies. And this is what they're doing. So I'm hoping everybody's going to participate. I don't know whether Russell, Martina, you can vote. Can you vote or not?
Yes, I've voted already, Karen.
Okay.
Yeah.
So it's only me. So there's 60 people on here. I should get to 59 because I can't vote. We're nearly there. Can I just say I am delighted. We have 15 people on here that have in-depth awareness of the EU CTR.
Oh, I think I'll get my coat, Karen.
Okay, I've got 55 people answered. That's good enough. So end the poll, share the results. Can you see the results now, Russell?
Yes, I can.
Fantastic.
Yep.
So has the company assessed the impact? Evenly spread between yes and no, but obviously yes and in progress, I'd say probably go together. No. So thank you very much, because that means most people actually at least have come to this with information as what they're doing. And level of awareness of EU CTR, 15 in depth, brilliant, 36 basic, I'd say I'm a basic, and no awareness, well, there are 4 people here to listen and learn. So we'll let you in. Excellent. Okay, so that's a really good view, I think, in terms of where we are today. Before we go in to talk about our views on the CTR, and I'm going to hand over to Russell and Martina after this. I actually thought it was useful just to look at the actual CTR and see what does it say about TMFs. There's only really three places it's mentioned. One is a sort of a summary that we all know: demonstrate compliance with the protocol, containing relevant documentation, blah, 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 archived appropriately. That's like a summary, a summary of it. Then you've got Article 57, and there's a couple of interesting things that I've highlighted, which I'm sure Russell's going to come on and talk about. The shall at all times contain the essential documents and readily available and directly accessible, which honestly, we could have a webinar on that, just that one particular topic. I think anybody who attended the MHRA GCP symposium, where the MHRA, Health Canada and FDA were talking, they're all going to be directly accessing it. And I think everyone now agrees. We just got to go with that. And of course, the third piece, which is where I'm going to hand over to Russell, and I'm not really going to talk about this very much, is really around the archiving and the 25 years and the challenges associated with archiving different media, etc., over the 25 years. And any alteration shall be traceable. So that's what it says. Let's dig into the detail. So Russell, I'm going to hand over to you now to give us, can you give us your thoughts on the EU CTR, please?
So I don't know if it's worth doing a very brief introduction for the people who don't know anything about it, but the new regulation came into effect on the 31st of January this year and repeals Directive 2001/20/EC, which was implemented at a national level throughout the EU member states and the EEA. And the real aim of this is to harmonise the requirements for the conduct of clinical trials in all member states. And it's hoped that this will make the EEA a more attractive proposition for conducting clinical trials and provide more information on clinical trials to researchers and the public. So in terms of the changes, which is what we're really looking at today, I think the first notable change is the change in the legislative status. Being a regulation rather than a directive, the requirements of 536/2014 will automatically be binding on all member states and those within the EEA that have signed up, including the UK as well, without the need for any national legislation to be implemented at a national level. So this ensures that the underlying rules for conducting clinical trials will be identical throughout the EEA, minimizing any differences in the application of clinical trial requirements. Perhaps most fundamental, I think, and I know Martina is going to be speaking on this quite extensively, is the introduction of a more harmonized and simplified and more efficient clinical trial application process. So while this is going to increase efficiency in the approval and the conduct and supervision of trials in the EU, some of the requirements of the regulations will require organizations to actually review and adjust their strategies, policies, and procedures. For example, the regulation requires that sponsors now submit a single electronic application, regardless of the number of participating countries. But this will also result in a single decision on a clinical trial, replacing the current separate approvals at a national level or given by each competent authority in each member state. So to do this, we now have a new EU clinical trial portal, the Clinical Trial Information System, developed by the European Medicines Agency, which will be used for the submission, for the authorization and the supervision of trials. As well as streamlining the process, the regulation also seeks to improve the transparency of clinical trials and reporting by making it a legal requirement for the trials to be made publicly available via the CTIS, which will serve as the central source of information for the public on all clinical trial applications and those being conducted within the member states, including among others, elements such as recruitment, first patient in, first patient, first visit, end of recruitment, end of trial, any temporary halts of a trial, and resumption of a trial, and any early termination. So this means that the public will now have access to all regulatory approvals and the full results of clinical trials, unless information is specifically exempted. Now, exempted information includes things like personal data and commercially sensitive or confidential information. So it's going to also be necessary for organizations to have policies and procedures in place to ensure that they have active and ongoing tracking and communication of these key events to ensure that they maintain compliance. So organizations will need to assess their submission dossiers and decide on the elements that they are prepared to make public to comply with the transparency expectations, and that which they need to redact to keep it from public view. And I know Martina is going to be speaking on that later today. So the regulation also aims to improve the standards for the protection of subjects and patients by introducing harmonized rules for informed consent, and also for the exchange of information between sponsors and regulators throughout the conduct of the trial. Now, these new safety reporting requirements are detailed in the regulation, including the obligation now to report all SUSARs through the Vigilance database, but also to annually submit a report on the safety of each product via the CTIS. So that's a change as well. As Karen has already indicated, the regulation now mandates, much to the pleasure of people who are involved in archiving, certainly, a new retention period of 25 years from the date of the end of the clinical trial, although the end of the clinical trial is for you to decide upon. This is a really welcome simplification of the current retention requirements, but at the same time adds some complexity to archiving, especially for digital content, because that can be challenging. And I'll be speaking about that at the end of the workshop today. So overall, I think the regulation is great in terms of streamlining and simplifying the clinical trial application process and facilitating the conduct of trials throughout the EEA, at the same time as increasing transparency. But there will be an impact on organizations in terms of having to review their strategies, policies, and procedures. And also, as we'll be looking today in the workshop, looking at perhaps new types of documentation that arise as a consequence of the implementation of this new regulation. So hopefully that gives you a brief overview on the kinds of changes we're going to be looking at today. And I'll hand over to Martina to go into more detail about the application process itself.
Thank you very much, Russell. And I have to say, I think it's quite interesting that Health Canada had just reduced theirs to 15 years, as we all bump ours up to 25 years. So it's give with one, take away with another. So anyway, thank you very much for that sort of overview. And what's useful about that, I think, is you keep thinking TMF, and we need to make sure today that we always think back. So what is that going to do to the TMF, or what's that? There's lots of things you mentioned, I think, that affect the TMF. And so, Martina, if I can come to you really and talk a little bit about, I know you're going to very, very much talk about the technology side of things, but it has a huge impact on the TMF as well. So let me hand over to you if that's okay.
Yeah, thank you, Karen. And yeah, just a short summary of what Russell has told us so nicely. So the new European clinical trial regulation represents a huge change. Actually, it's the largest change in legislative framework in the European economic area since decades. And it strives for harmonization of the clinical trial processes within Europe. And coming from the current directive, so what we have used until now, to the new regulation, Russell already mentioned that we are coming from a directive which already discussed some harmonization and compare the procedures to a regulation which is binding. And it's really binding. All the member companies have to implement this, and it applies. And they are forced to use these processes, and they are forced to use the clinical trial information system. So, and with this, it's a huge step into harmonization because they all receive the same packages. They all receive not to the down to the document detail, but through the same tool, and they have the same timelines and everything, which will automatically over the time lead to also a better shared understanding what should be expected for a trial. So before also Russell mentioned this, we had an independent submission of clinical trial applications per country. So we have the complete package, so the core or the global documents, and then plus everything which was required in a certain country to the countries, and we had to submit to ethics committees as well. Ethics committees in Europe, in other countries, it's the IRB. Now everything, the global documents as well as the country required documents as well as the ethics committee required documents are submitted in one package through the portal. It's a challenge in its own. The package is huge, or maybe huge if the trial is huge, but on the other hand, it's really just one place where everything can be uploaded and then downloaded by the assessing body. They also have very strict timelines, and this concept to submit everything in one pack through the portal and have very strict timelines for assessment of the packages moves kind of the first patient first visit approach for recruitment, which we had so far in Europe, to a kind of a nearly simultaneous approval and then enrollment. I know this is something which is not really important for documentation, but it is important for study planning. Then Russell also mentioned already that the information which is submitted in the clinical trial applications is treated confidential or was treated confidential in the past, but everything which is submitted through the CTIS will be published. There are some exceptions, like the quality part of the investigation and medical product dossier. So this will be kept confidential, but most of the documents will really be published, and we have to prepare for this. And this has an impact on, obviously, how we handle our documents. So what we need to do as sponsors, or as well as CROs, we need to ensure that we comply with the new requirements regarding preparation of document packages, and because this is the sponsor's responsibility, we need to protect personal data and commercially confidential information. Next slide. Here. I think most of you know these timelines, but I think because this has also a kind of an impact on the way how we prepare, I thought I show it again. So we are already now, the CTIS has gone live, and we are in transition period 1, which means we can still use the old regulatory framework. And for these studies, which we submit now under the regulatory framework, of course, currently nothing changes. It's the same documents, it's the same way we have provided the documents, and the same way we get responses back from the authorities. But we need to prepare, because with the cutoff date end of next January, every new submission will have to be done under CTR. And until this time point, we have to make sure that we have our documents ready, which may require for some of us also adaptations of the TMF, because this is a place where a lot of CTA documents are managed and handled. And we have to consider that for studies which are now running, we need to prepare for transition if they are long-term studies. So also here we have to know to assess what are the new documents, not document types. How do we sort our documents in our TMFs to prepare the packages, because we have to resubmit. if we want to add new countries in Europe, or if the study is going forward beyond the end of transition period 2, which is on the 31st of January 2025. Next slide. This is just an overview. You know, there was a lot of uproar, at least in our company, but I've also noted this in some of the discussions with TMF groups at conferences. Oh, what do we need to submit? It may look so different. No, it's not that much different. We are preparing documents for the part 1, that's the combined scientific assessment by the authorities, so the member states, which are basically the same as we have them currently now with the old. It's just a package which has to be prepared once for Europe and not anymore once per country. And there are the same requirements. And then we have for the countries some extra requirements. This may be the country versions of your informed consent procedures, your insurance documents, investigator CVs. These are all country level documents. They have been always country level documents, and they will be country level documents. About the new document, which may be needed for EU CTR, we will talk later, because this is the focus of the meeting today. Next slide. EU CTR comes also with some new requirements, and we have a couple more reporting requirements by the EMA. Everything needs to go through the CTIS, and we have some regular study events, so notifications, which we partly already have right now, like startup recruitment notifications or trial notifications. And here we have a couple more than we had in the past, and we have to plan for this and to ensure that we notify the authorities as required, and that we document that we have notified the authorities as was requested. And then we have some ad hoc study events. Some of them are also just simple notifications if something happens. Some of them are related to documents which we then have to create and decide on where do we file them. Next slide.
I think this is really interesting, Martina, because I think this is the bit that in my learnings about the CTR is all these notifications. Because every time you have something like this, it's a document. What do you do with the document? You've got to do something with it, and I think that's quite a big change. But I know we're going to come on and talk about that, but I just think that makes quite a big difference.
Yeah. So Russell already mentioned that one of the key changes coming with EU CTR is the larger level of transparency, which is EU is striving for. So it means that the information which we are submitting through the portal will be public once a trial is approved. So these documents which are being uploaded and then be public are the protocol synopsis, then the investigator brochure, but also our reporting of study events. This is all going public, and we must ensure that these documents, once they are public, do not contain any visible information about protected personal data, for example, because we as trial sponsors are responsible to protect these data. We also, it's up to us to protect our commercially confidential information. And for this purpose, we can defer documents, or we also can redact documents. In all these, the need to protect information in our submission packages leads to the purpose that we will have in future 2 versions of certain documents. One version which is not for publication, and one version that's for publication. The CTIS always requires a version for publication, which is the one which does not show any confidential information or protected personal data. And the other one is the not for publication. This is shows the information which the member states need to assess the trial and to ensure that they do not approve the black box. Next slide.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Martina. That's much appreciated in terms of an overview. Now, I have to say to everybody on the call, that's as much as we're telling you today. We're now going to be moving into some polls, and then we're going to be opening up for conversation. So sharing your experiences. But I think to follow on from Martina's presentation, we've got 5 questions about CTIS use. So if you wouldn't mind, please answering the polls, and hopefully the answers that I've put in are reasonable answers. I did sort of make up some of them. And there's lots of different options. But Martina, while people are answering the poll, would you mind just giving us an idea of Bayer or what you're doing? How are you managing the information to go into CTIS? Where are you pulling it from, etc.?
Yeah, we have decided to collect all the information which will be submitted via the portal in our TMF. Everything, and everything means everything. So it is all information. Even the data field information is being collected in the TMF, and our regulatory information management system only is there to track submission dates and to relate this to other regulatory information. But everything which is physically going through the portal is being collected and tracked in the TMF.
Okay, and so I'm assuming that means that your volume in your TMF has increased significantly.
It is, yes. It is increasing significantly, specifically because, and I will come later to this when we are talking about new documents, because to document the packages which really have gone through the portal, we can, this is not being kept in the portal, but we can download PDFs. So we can basically download all our submission packages, and we will do so to have a proof later on what we have submitted. Maybe for a CTA that's not so important, but on the other hand, so how else would you do this? To really say this was the basis which was submitted to it, if you cannot see this visibly in the portal. But and then more important it is for notifications to really to have to track what we have notified through CTIS. We are downloading kind of the notification document and also file this in the TMF. It's something which we are doing our first submission next week, and we are really kind of excited to see how it all works out and whether we have found the right placements for everything. And yeah, it's experimentation.
And also, sorry.
No, I was just going to say, I think what you've highlighted there as well, Martina, which is important for the next section we're going on to discuss, is that sometimes we're talking about new documents that need to be generated as a consequence of the implementation of this regulation. But for other circumstances, such as the notification of these ad hoc events, there are probably variations on a document that we currently have. Sometimes they are just downloads of data that we take from the CTIS. And on other occasions, such as with the publication and not for publication documents, they are actually just different versions of the same document. So although I think we've used the term new document here, in reality, what we're talking about is actually replacement data downloads for some documents in some instances, sometimes new versions of documents and sometimes variations on documents. I think that's going to be an important distinction to make as we move into the next section.
Yeah, so I'm going to end the poll now and share the results. So Russell, if you wouldn't mind, please going through now. this is where we need you guys to take part and give us some ideas, because there are 10 of you that have used CTIS to date. So who would like to share their experiences, where you're, so when you've used CTIS, or if you're in planning, in terms of, you know, 16 of you have got resource dedicated to it. 13 of you have got processes in place. And then the collection of documents is hugely varied. TMF, RIM, TMF and DMS, TMF and RIM, all three other. And then a mixture between centralized and decentralized. So who would like to share? Or I'm going to pick on people, which might not be very helpful, but come on guys, we need you to share, to say, what are you doing differently? Who else is collecting theirs in their TMF? Who else is collecting theirs in different systems?
All right, Karen, I'll go before you pick
Thank you,
someone. So I was one of the ones that had kind of that mixed model where we are collecting information in both TMF and RIM. And I'll try to focus on the TMF side. So our goal was to submit in CTIS, I think in January. It was earlier this year. And on the clinical side, the TMF side, we couldn't really mobilize and make the configurations that we wanted to. So this is kind of a three-step or three-phased approach, where this first approach is really looking at the process of what we have to collect in the ClinOps side for part 2. And in that process of looking at the tracking, so I think, Russell, you mentioned earlier some of those milestone dates, first patient in, targeted CSR, all of those things that are related to dates were currently collected within our TMF CTMS system. So those were the things that we wanted to configure kind of for that second phase. The other part was looking at these documents, and Martina, I think you had a mapping table of the documents that were expected and what could be housed in the TMF. We went through that same process, but we had to consider our regulatory team and what they already housed within RIM. What do they need for their triggers of, okay, this I'm now to the next step, because there's those certain timelines in between. If you, and please correct me if I'm wrong, if you submit something, if you submit the first part and you're not ready for the second part, then you have a certain duration of time to submit the second part. So it was looking at these different scenarios between the two teams. So what we've done is we have added fields and a sub-artifact related to CVs. We collect different types of CVs for the principal investigator only. And it was condensed versus expanded, and if it had a signature or not. We were able to add some of those key dates in anticipation for a new application implementation next year. We didn't want to overlap with what was coming with new technology. So we added some fields to our global organizations, our study countries. We added CTR submission dates, CTR approval dates. So a lot of the fields that were added were specifically targeting CTR activities, so that when we do implement our, I don't know if we can say which vendor we use, but when we implement our new startup application, those key milestones are already included in that new application. So the data transfer or this data migration that will happen with the new implementation will be so much manual work. So currently the manual work in tracking what we weren't able to add in our eTMF CTMS, it's in Excel format. Document metadata is being added. IRB approval dates, there were several. We had to pick one that kind of fit into these expected documents. And then the second phase is taking our lessons learned from our first CTIS submission and really trying to identify areas where we can automate between our clinical vault and our RIM vault.
Leila, that's interesting, because I'm thinking, as I'm obviously thinking TMF reference model and extended things that we have. we have a set of milestones that we've already built in to the model. We have a bit of metadata, and I'm wondering whether maybe some of that needs to feed back into the TMF reference model structure to see if we can align the metadata and the milestones for requirements for the CTR. That might be quite an interesting exercise.
Yes, I think it'd be very valuable, because it did take a good group of people and experts to identify what those milestones are, and even for future, do those milestones belong on the ClinOps side or on the RIM side? And RIM, our regulatory team needed one date for which we triggered in the ClinOps side. Do we enter that date? Is that date, cross-linked in RIM? Is that date manually entered by us when we do that final submission? We're still working through that process. What is the best process? And ultimately, can we automate it?
Yeah, and but I guess it's not only for EU CTR. These milestones which are associated with certain documents for tracking, they are important for also for global CTAs and not just for CTR. They are also associated with events within the trial, which we currently already have. So, and this is absolutely valuable to also considering that we will go more and more data driven and by automation to have these metadata associated to the reference model fields. And I understand what you mean, because we also have some limitations regarding data field information. That's a lot of workarounds currently. I mean, it might be easier if you calculate your milestones and are not fixed to milestones which are associated to a fixed expected document list. So rather more flexibility.
Well, we'll take that back as something we can probably look at. So just one very quick question, Russell, did you get screenshots?
I did, yes, I've closed it, thank you. I just had a question actually for Layla, which was around the recording of those dates. You may have answered it already and I've missed it, but I wondered where you took those dates from and whether the milestones were recorded in your CTMS, your ETMF or your RIM, how that decision was made and what the time limits that were affixed to those dates.
It was basically December when we started this activity, and the CTIS target date moved from maybe several months out to 1 month out. So our timelines, we had to just look at which system already had existing fields. Within our CTMS, we had some of those planning fields, we didn't use them. So it was a matter of, do we have the resources to manually enter these dates for our planned submission, or do we just use our Excel sheet and plan to configure this later? The team, we have the luxury of having a dedicated team with experience, and they submitted CTIS through CTIS with what they had, both manually and the ETMF document. After they submitted is when we were able to add those additional fields, retrain our teams, and again, we have planned SSU application implementation, and a lot of those key milestones will come with that new module. So the decision to not add fields available in the SSU module was really based on resourcing and the amount of duplicative work that would happen between now and technical go live.
And of course you would
Yeah,
and then you would have the problem if you didn't already have a data field for that date within your system, whether it's your CTMS or your ETMF, or that you'd probably have to configure that and then go through some kind of validation to ensure that that was working as intended and was fit for purpose.
So
which is an additional burden upon you as well.
Absolutely. So it was December to March 11th was when we were able to get those configurations. Simple configuration. The metadata that I talked about from the ETMF side, some of the sub artifacts or the additional fields for sub artifacts, and then the CTMS kind of CTR submission date, CTR approval date, global organization. So we want to capture the CTIS ID and the name. And for those of you that have kind of duplicates or a duplicate challenge within your global directory, we kind of ran into that too. There has to be a source for the way that you name your organizations, the way that you name your PIs, and what is that source. So a lot of things kind of got us as we were going through this process. Another gotcha moment is related to system security. And this is how we restrict our views for end users within our TMF. Being able to understand what we have is called DAC, Dynamic Access Control. We had a moment where we were going through testing and permissions for some of our users weren't restricted at the country level. So it is still that process of understanding, which, if you're in a mixed model study and you have a CRO working on your EEA submissions, you don't necessarily want everyone to see what is, those activities. So there's a lot when systems are involved and security is not as, it can be customized. We may over process it a little bit, or we may not think about those details until we're in testing.
I can see, Leila, that there's a significant amount of challenges associated with this particular process. I do want to move us on to the documents, but I wanted to find out if there was anybody else who wanted to. So thank you, Leila, most appreciated to get that real first-hand experience. Is there anybody else who wants to give us a quick sort of snapshot of what they've done or what experience they've had before we move on and start talking about the nitty-gritty, which is the documents themselves?
Karen, maybe I can volunteer. It's Leon from J&J. So we're planning our first CTIS submission. I don't think we want to be the first, by all means. So, and I recognize some of the points you made there, right? CTIS was expected ready years ago already, right? And ended up being ready really just very short for that drop dead date, if I can call it like that. So I think that has brought significant challenge along with it, right? Because have we been able to play around in the system a lot? Do we know what it does? Of course, a little or maybe enough, but that, I think the availability of the system and the specs has been quite a limiting factor. And in listening to Martina and listening to Leila, some of the challenges, and we're going to end up initially at least with a mix of systems where that will be supporting the submissions, and also some questions and some decisions to be made there, right? Because ideally in your TMF, you want to set up individual documents. But to Martina's point, you want to also be able to see what the submission package was. So is TMF the right place for that? Well, maybe not, right? Because it already has all the individual components going into the package. So are you going to be filing duplicately if you're also filing the submission package in your TMF? And to Russell's point, how do you manage those redacted and the unredacted or the deferred differences in your TMF? Are you making that difference? Well, you should, because you want to make sure you are able to show what you submitted. But then how do you do that? And that's maybe where new artifacts come in. But also, if you look at some of the artifacts we currently have, those are either for health authorities or for ethics IRBs. But now with EOCTR, none of those is a true match, right? Because it's actually a bit of a mix, right, of HA and IRB EC. So what do you choose? Do you choose one of the existing ones, or would a new one be a better fit? And I think most of our challenges probably are, as we're preparing how to handle the part 2 pieces of the package, right? I think for the part 1, I mean, that's more manageable, right? It's centralized, but how to manage the individual contributions that country teams or country representatives have to build that part 2 and to effectively manage the part 2 contents is definitely more challenging, the way we look at that, than compared to part 1.
So Leon, that's like a perfect introduction to the next section. So thank you very much. It's like we set it up.
I didn't get paid for that, guys.
No, he didn't get paid for it. Absolutely, absolutely. But this is where we're going on to, which is the sort of the meat, hopefully, of what we're trying to get out of today, which is, what do we do? What are we doing with our reference model that we all love? I know I'm probably a little over in love with it, but do we need to change something? So what we're going to do now is actually go through a list of document types. This is by no means an exhaustive list. There may be things missing, and I think some of these will stop us and we'll have like a real debate about them, and some of them will be, no, that's easy, that's easily mapped. What I'm going to do is I'm also going to have the reference model open so that we can go and actually pull up the reference model and actually talk about where things go. But where we're going to start is, I'm going to hand over to Martina, really, and I think this is probably one of the biggest sections that we're going to talk about, is all the regulatory notifications. So not just the information that comes out of them, but also where do we put it? So Martina, if I can hand over to you to talk a little bit about your experience with where you're putting the notifications, what levels you're putting them at, country or study level, etc., and then open it out to the floor for people to give ideas.
We have, so let's talk about notifications first. Let's start with those which are coming out of the CTIS, because one of this is associated to our clinical trial applications, which means the request for information. A request for information may come on the global, so on the study level, but we also may have a request for information from each of the member states, which would then be on the country level. So we have both levels in this request for information, and the question is, for me, is it important? Does it play a role whether we put this to the country level or to the study level, or is it just a notification that we keep everything together? So what are the notifications which we have received in the frame of our CTAs? Same for the assessment report. We will have an assessment report by the reporting member state, which is on the study level, and we will have assessment reports by the countries, which is on a country level. So that's my first question. What is the most feasible place to put this? Would we do it on the regulatory and then on the study level and on the country level, depending on where it comes through? Or would we just keep it in one artifact? And here I would like to open the discussion.
Yeah, sorry, just interesting that you said that, because Leon, you were talking just now about regulatory and ethics and the sort of the blurred line between regulatory and ethics. So is anybody putting are these documents, do they go naturally into the regulatory section, or are people actually putting some of them into the ethics section, or are we facing a challenge with the reference model?
Good question.
I think we are facing a challenge, Karen. This is Victoria here. We are facing multiple challenges. One is that where you know, which section does it go to, where does it belong to? And then from a technology standpoint, you know, there are, with RIM, ETMF, these two sections maybe are not always handled in the same way. And so that's now, what is the technology? Now, is the technology going to help or hinder here? And then third challenge is, if the submission goes from one country only, but the approvals have to go back, you know, into all the countries, how do we handle that to avoid duplications, and how do we handle it in a dynamic fashion, and how is the technology, able to assist us? And today we're not set up for that, but what should we do?
And they're two very different problems, but very real problems. And I think all we can do as a group today is really think about what do we have to do to our Excel spreadsheet and our classifications. And then it's up to the vendors, obviously, to be able to then work out how to manage those documents going forward. But I think from what you've just said, Vittoria, and sorry, Martina, I didn't mean to take over. Because I pulled the spreadsheet.
No, that's fine. Absolutely. This is now a discussion which is going really to the depth of the reference model. What's more meaningful, one or the other? As I said, you can have solutions where you put everything together. That's okay. You can do it, or whether you really try to map this out into the reference model.
Can I pick up on the point Vittoria made, actually, and it goes back to something that we discussed during the preparation for this workshop, Martina, and forgive me if I'm wrong in not recalling that correctly. So Victoria said, does the CTIS help or hinder in this process? I believe yesterday you said that on submitting your application, you have just the one opportunity to download that information from CTIS. And if you miss that opportunity, it's not possible to then download it at a later date. Am I correct in recalling that, or is it possible to retrospectively download your notifications?
No, you cannot retrospectively download. You have to download this immediately.
Yeah.
This is my understanding from the sandbox testing.
Okay, so I don't know if anybody's actually been through that process in the live system and is able to advise on whether a retrospective download is possible at all. That would be really helpful.
I believe this is Manan Trivedi, and I believe in CTIS, yeah, I think the download is possible. You can see your notices and alert being there for you. So that's, to me, it's not disappearing.
Okay, so you can do that retrospectively, Manan.
Yeah, I mean, if it stays like your mailbox where you go there and you can see which one is you have read, which is not yet read and all. But it is there, and you can download it.
That's helpful. Thank you.
So going back to the notifications, is everybody downloading all the notifications and putting them all in the TMF?
Yeah, I think here I'm sharing my perspective here. So what we do is we try to be have all documents to be in one side or one kind of repository, and so for our process we decided to REAMS to be that document repository. While we reference to the TMF two things. One is the submission evidence and the approval letters. So we wanted to show the inspector that these are the documents which was submitted for the trial, and this is the approval letter. So inspector can easily see what is been submitted, and for individual document, they can trace back to the REAMS if they wanted to see the document. But now I think something which might needs to be changed in the reference model is because I think now we have a better what you can say document or something else. Instead of cover letter, usually we were filing cover letter in TMF for submission evidence, but right now after we in CTIS we put submission, I mean we hit submission, we can generate the submission evidence, so that will not only show when it is submitted, but what all part 1, part 2 document is submitted. So this is, I think it's a better way to show the inspector that this was submitted for these countries, and this was the time and date of the submission, while in cover letter might be generated even before. So that might not be the right to file as a regulatory submission evidence in our artifact.
So Manan, just to get some,
what's listed out here in the third line, CTA output or overall CTA download, which is a zip file.
Sorry,
No,
I
I mean after you submit, there is an acknowledgement happens, and that we are using Microsoft Edge, where it generates the entire page of browsing as a PDF. So that's the evidence we are gathering.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's what.
And it shows when it is actually in real time submitted, and it lists all part 1, part 2 documents.
Yeah, that's actually the one. Mm-hmm.
There was somebody else who wanted to comment. Sorry, I can only see a few screens. If you want to put your hands up, if you want to comment,
it was me, Lila.
Oh, sorry, David.
But
sorry.
No worries. The question was answered. It was related to once you click the submit button, what type of acknowledgement is received. And my takeaway from that was the timestamp of what you actually submitted versus the cover letter, which is currently used as your submission evidence, though it does not have that same timestamp.
Yeah.
So maybe we need to think about another sub-artifact specifically around submission evidence.
Correct.
Yeah, correct. I think that's a better suited because in cover letter generated before, you might have a document date even before, while the submission evidence will be matching with the date of submission also.
What about the issue of trial level versus country level? Is there anything we need to do to the reference model, trial versus country versus site? Because if you submit on a trial level to cover all of EU, but you get your answers back and things are done locally, I realize it's challenging and that goes to your point, Victoria, it's challenging from a filing perspective, but do we need to change anything in the reference model?
So, okay, so here's my thinking. Yep. If the reference model, so the Excel, if the reference model is telling us what the content of the TMF is that changing? If the answer is no, if we still have, I don't think it's changing. We may have some additional granularity on how we are submitting and etc. But in principle, we still are going to submit and get an approval, regulatory and ethics IRB. And so the answer is, no, we don't have to change necessarily, for me at least, because the content doesn't change. Maybe we need to add some granularity to acknowledge, new notifications or whatever to make it clearer, or the description of what goes in some artifacts. But I think the content isn't changing. Or is it? It's still going to be part of the TMF.
Mariangela raised her. Thank you, Mariangela, for raising your hand.
Yeah, that's okay. Sorry, I was just going to say, someone in the chat box said we do have a sub-artifact called receipt of acknowledgement, and that is correct. We've got that in there already. So maybe that's where we file documents like that.
But I wonder whether we need to change the name.
Yeah, I was saying, if we say it's an acknowledgement later, then we don't have it, because here is not kind of the letter of receipt. We see it's auto-generated in system we capture. So maybe to rename it submission evidence, but in principle we can use that also.
Or we just revise the description of it, like someone mentioned. Yeah. Okay.
Kathy,
to kind of speak to the granularity, Victoria, that you were mentioning, if there wasn't a change, and then we could remain within the parameters of the current reference model, though, at least from the CGen experience, what we're trying to do is leverage the metadata. So we're working, we drive our processes or these submission activities future state by reports. And whether if it's the same document, but you have country versus, country versus the local, and it's the same artifact, or if you already know what you're looking for, these reports can be generated to support the, I guess, efficiency in trying to reference these documents versus looking at them at the folder level. having those readily made reports to drive your, whatever process you're going through, may help support that granularity. At least that's our approach now. So we have several reports that have already been requested for our next phase that we're going to test out. And I think it is critical when you are in that, I don't know if we want to call it a hybrid, that when we're trying to figure out how regulatory and ClinOps overlap, where are the business operations overlapping, what types of reports can we share so that neither team has to do any duplicative work. But you find you're looking at the documents or these time points from one source.
Thanks, Leila. I'm going to come to you in 1 second. I just want to actually answer. There's a question from Rita from Vera. You're saying, Rita, if you currently file FDA submissions in a regulatory repository such as RIM, why consider filing them in the TMF since we don't file the FDA submission TMF? And I think one of the things that's really important as a concept here is that the TMF is the inspectable story of the study. It doesn't all have to be in a TMF system. So if you have some of it in a RIM system and some of it in a TMF system, that's absolutely fine. There's nothing saying you have to put it into your TMF system, but that submission is part of the TMF because that tells the story of the trial. But so we're absolutely not saying with this, oh, you must put it in the TMF. We're saying it's part of that sort of bigger umbrella picture. And if you happen to put it in the TMF, where would you put it?
Okay.
Does that help?
Yeah, and
Yes.
Just to add to the point that indeed it's up to companies. So like we are filing it into RIMS and we are referencing in just TMF. We don't file it in TMF.
Absolutely.
We just file the submission evidence and just the approval later in there.
Leon, can I come to you because you had your hand up?
Yeah, thank you. I think something we need to keep in the back of our minds, right? Because we makes total sense that we're discussing changes to the TMF reference model. We need to realize that for the next 3 years at least, there will still be new content being generated under the existing EU CTD framework, right? So any change we make shouldn't break what we currently have for EU CTD.
I totally agree with you, and also I think the anything that we change should be additional, as in we should be looking at compounding it rather than actually completely totally changing something. I agree with you completely. So
Karen, hi, I'm late to the game. I was in another meeting, but as I was going through that white paper and I was kind of making notations on all the different requirements this is having, a lot of this just kind of told me that it's gonna map right into our existing reference model. It's just another organization that we're capturing the information for. But then my other question is since this is for the EU, will we have changes coming out of the UK because they're no longer part of the EU?
So the UK has adopted the EU 536/2014.
Oh, okay.
Subsuming it into its own national legislation.
Yes.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Thank you, Russell. I was going to say something sarcastic about the whole thing, then I decided I probably shouldn't because that's too.
Well, you're coming from the US, what do I know?
Yeah, no, absolutely. So there's no issue there. So, and I realized, sorry, I'm now, am I still sharing my screen? I forgot, I can't.
Yeah.
Yes, I think I am. Okay, there we are. Going back to those notifications, I'm assuming, Martina, sorry, I have taken over yours because I'm controlling the reference model, so it's very hard to not take over. And it's also my natural personality, sorry. What do we think we need? Do we need to do anything about the notifications in terms of changing the reference model? What do you think, Martina?
From my perspective, I wouldn't change anything. It's rather like always, it's a decision from what is the most logical perspective from your way you have organized your documentation. As you already noticed here, a couple of companies put these documents into the RIM system. We rather put everything into the TMF. So we need to find a home in the TMF. But for me, I think it's not difficult to find a home in the TMF, and whether we file distinguish between country level and study level for the various types of notification, whether they are from a member state or from the member state concerned or from the reporting member state, that's up to your understanding. You just have to be consistent within your own way, how you point it out in your TMF file plan.
So where are people putting the notifications? Are you putting them in 331?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Anybody putting them anywhere else?
Sorry, which one is 331?
331? Notification of safety information?
It depends on which part of notifications. If you have event notifications, of course, they are not going in 331, they are going in 303.
311.
311.
Yeah.
311 is from a submission perspective.
Right.
Right. So that's from a submission perspective, or you go with the 332 if this is more fitting for the event notifications.
Like correspondence or.
Yeah. Let me just.
If it's coming back from the health authority.
No, the event notifications. This in the line here, I distinguish between regulatory notifications. These are notifications coming to us from through CTIS. So these are kind of requests for information. That's a notification with questions. Then we have these assessment reports. That's all incoming documents or incoming information. And then we have these event notifications, which we have to do. So we are we have to notify status reports. And this is why it is in 3.3.
Right. So for me, the first line, everything coming from EMA, to us in CTIS, is going under 312, in fact.
Okay.
That's how we file it simply. It's the assessment reports is a regulatory authority decision, a request for, we really got it very simple. Everything coming from the health authority goes in 312, and everything going to the health authority, except for safety reporting of SUSAR or other, goes in 311. And any distinctions are made in the metadata. We have a title metadata, and that's where we would specify request for information for, I don't know, updated consent form, or request for whatever, or if we were submitting back, response to request for information, blah, blah.
Okay, so as I said, for me, our RFI would go into 311 because it's related to the submission, so to the CTA itself. Okay.
Okay, so this is very interesting because obviously everyone's interpreting the route, which we know people do. So I think what we're going to do is we're going to take, I've got a recording of all of this. We're going to move on, otherwise we're never going to get through it all. But we're going to then take all of this back to the change control board, because obviously that's where we're going to be able to pull all the information together and say, this is generally what people have thought. And we'll take the chat as well, because I see, Paolo, you've made a comment about 332 as well. And so we will basically want to come up with a recommended industry approach. People can use do it differently, but we will then really look at it. Okay, so
can I ask a quick related question before we move on about some of these notifications? So some of them are notifications that a specific piece of information has changed, such as I think like first subject, first visit date or something like that, which would usually be something you track in your CTMS. And it's not necessarily a document. Would you produce a document to record the fact that you have submitted that? Because you don't submit a document, as I understand it, to the portal.
Yeah.
It's correct. We don't, there is no document with the associated with the submission, but as it's kind of the reference that we've done it, this notification. This is a download from the CTIS, and this is being filed on the TMF.
And I think that to me sounds like the big difference is that whereas before we never had all this information, as soon as you do something, you download it. You've now got a document. You've now got to do something with your document.
Yeah, I just wanted to clarify that you don't produce a document to record the fact that you're changing this, just the evidence that you have done
no,
this.
it's just the evidence. We just download the evidence that we have done this as required. There are some notifications of as I said before, of irregular events, or this is there you have to produce documents. If you, for example, go on hold, or if you withdraw a hold for a study, then you need to produce a document explaining what you are doing. I mean, you could do this also via data field information, but sometimes it's easier to produce a document and upload the document to give the explanation if it's more complex. But with the status notifications, usually you don't have a document for uploading.
Can we just talk very quickly about the CTIS output? So downloading the whole zip file. Leon, you mentioned that at the start when you sort of introduced the document section. We're talking about, do you download the entire CTA and put it into the TMF, but then you get duplication? Martina, do you put that in your TMF? Do you download it and put it in your TMF?
We have had huge discussions. We're currently doing this, yes.
Anybody else putting it in their TMF?
It's a zip file and we are putting it. Yeah.
So what we do is just we make sure that after we create a binder in our RIM system, that zip file we are submitting, and that there is no change in CTIS and here. But basically we don't re-download it and archive once again in our system, because it's the same thing, unless there is a change.
Yeah, I think why we are doing this is because currently, and this may change over the time, or will hopefully change over the time, it's a manual upload, and this there might be mistakes, and just to have a proof what has really gone through the portal. That's the reason why we are downloading this, or why we decided to download this for the time being.
Just as a very general point, if I can, on zip files, they're notoriously difficult to archive. So I wouldn't recommend downloading a zip file.
Yeah, I understand. Yeah, but as I said, for the time being, it is because it's CTIS is a new system as well. I think there might be workarounds which will hopefully go away over the time.
Okay, moving us on to the next set of documents, we had a summary protocol synopsis for layperson, a clinical trial summary report, and a clinical trial summary report for laypersons, which, going back to the HSRIA document, were viewed as potentially new document types. Where do they go? Are there new document types? What are you doing with them? And Victoria, you have your hand up. I don't know if it relates to this, but you've got your hand.
It was a question still on the previous, do we know what is the retention period for CTIS, on CTIS? What's the retention period? Are they keeping stuff there for 30 years, 25 years? Do we know? Did they specify?
So So I think, Victoria, the answer to that is if it's any documentation or records related to the clinical trial, they should be retained for 25 years from the date of the end of the clinical trial. How long EMA is going to keep it, I have no idea at all, I'm afraid. But I would suggest that the 25-year retention period is the one that should be applied to any documentation related to the clinical study itself. For the trial.
Agreed. So I was more, it was more on the, should we download yes or no? How long will it keep it there? So yeah.
It's a good question. Yeah.
In
fact, I'll take a note to see if I can find that information out. Thank you. Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
Spoken, it's a minimum viable product, and we've already experienced now, or companies who have started to upload for submission have already experienced that file easily being gone. So I think it is, it requires some time where we cannot trust the system fully, or until we can trust the system. So, and until this, we have decided to stay on the safe side and rather do a little bit more on our end.
Okay, moving us on, thank you. Moving us on to these 3 documents. Do people see them as new documents? Where are you filing them? Anybody want to offer their thoughts?
Protocol Synopsis is already there, like in 213.
Hold on, let me pull up the system. Let me pull up my, oh, hang on a sec. I think I stopped sharing. Did I stop sharing?
You did, Karen.
Yep.
Sorry about that. Didn't mean to. I went escape and it stopped sharing. 1 second. I wanted to do this. 1 second. Share screen. Share that screen. I think I might just be sharing all of you now. Hold on 1 second.
Yeah, that's what you're doing.
There we are. Okay. Am I
There
showing
you go.
Can you see the reference model now?
Yeah. So, yeah, as he mentioned, protocol synopsis is a summary of the pertinent points of the protocol. So is that any different?
Yeah, I think it's a generic, I mean, here what CTIS is mentioning is a lay summary in understandable language for the layperson for protocol synopsis. So it could be anything. While I think what reference model was referring is the key points or summarizing the protocol, calling it as protocol synopsis. So the thing is whether you want to segregate this protocol synopsis of for only layperson, or we can just add in a definition also it will applicable to layperson.
Yeah. I would kind of expand the definition. I wouldn't create a new one, and it would be like a sub artifact.
Well, absolutely. I was not expecting new artifact. I was thinking more new sub artifact. Do you think we should have a protocol synopsis for the layperson as a sub artifact?
Yeah, that's what I would think. But I think we should update the definition. Well,
I'd just update the definition.
Yeah, I would update the definition too, just to kind of include that.
I think this is one of the challenging ones in the sense it's for laypersons, so is the language throughout going to be different? It's not so much a different version of the same document or a redacted version, but it's going to probably be written in a completely different format, I think.
Yeah.
And
possibly is a new sub artifact, I think.
And on the basis that our sub artifacts are a superset, people can always choose not to use it.
Right.
But I think it is a different type of document. It's probably worth putting it in as a new sub artifact.
I agree, Karen. Yeah.
You know, and I thought it was interesting that, you know, I think this is in the white paper that you would send it then to the regulatory agency, but it doesn't say, are they going to be posting it? Is this part of like ct.gov or the registration, that this is where that information is going to be? What do we do with it once we've created it? Are we supposed to do something with it?
yeah, they are expecting this to be part of our CTIS. They would like to have a lay summary, lay protocol synopsis. It could be part of the protocol. It's still a little bit ambiguous how it is written in the EMA requirements. But what is being done, it's published on the website. So, and this is why they require it, because so that the people who are looking at this trial on the website can understand what the trial is about.
Okay.
But so I think that there is a point there. What are these for? I mean, we always have asked ourselves that question in defining the artifacts. So if this is the intended use is for giving to the subject, there's a 227 section, which is other information given to the trial subject to further assist with understanding of trial requirements or concepts. So seeing that the synopsis is a concept protocol, is that not where it should go? I mean, if it's understanding who is it for, I think is actually a good point for us before we kind of go and change and create new things.
See, the way I think of it is that anyone who wants to find out information on CTIS about trials, a layperson would refer to the protocol synopsis and the ICF to understand what is being asked of them if they were willing to participate in a study. So it's it's not what you would give potentially to a subject that participates in a study. At least that's how I understand it to be. It's there for people to access on the website if they want to understand information about a study.
Indeed, yeah.
Indeed.
Yeah, so it's
And even if it's given to the subjects to help them understand, it still could still be filed under the protocol synopsis. It's, to me, the understanding is if there's not another specific place for it, then it goes to
other
areas. Yeah.
I think we already have that section for protocol synopsis. Then it's better to have sub artifact accommodating a layperson. That's it.
Yeah, I think Victoria is right in terms of, you know, what is this document for, but I think the purpose of this document is actually not specifically for the subject, but for anybody who may have an interest in the trial. So, you know, even though I may not be participating in the trial in any way at all, I may have an interest in monitoring these things or just looking at them, and therefore 227 may not fit. Sorry, Victoria.
The same principle applies to the other two on here. Sorry, I'm bound to put something up on my screen that you shouldn't see, so just close your eyes because I'm flicking between all sorts of things. But this clinical trial summary report and the clinical trial summary report for laypersons, the same principle applies there, doesn't it?
Yeah,
so
we already have those sections. We just need to include a new sub-artifact, in my opinion.
Do we think the clinical study report synopsis and the summary clinical study report is fine? Do we need to change anything? We just need to add in a 231. We need to add a sub-artifact for laypersons.
Originally, I had a sub-artifact under 231, Karen, when I did my own mapping. But Dennis has his hand up. I don't know if Dennis has an idea.
Hi, Dennis.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
So are we looking too much for where things fit? Right now, we have a protocol synopsis in the protocol, correct?
Correct, yeah.
So could that not be the same protocol synopsis that can be placed into the CTIS? Why write another one?
No, and you're right, Dennis. This is what I try to point out. Currently, EMA doesn't say explicitly that this needs to be a separate document, but they say your protocol synopsis needs to be in a lay language.
Oh, so they're not asking you for an additional one. They're just saying that it needs to be in a language anyone can understand.
as I said, IMA is a little bit unclear in their guidance.
And that's
it
what
seems
the,
that sometimes
isn't that what the protocol synopsis is anyway?
What a
no, actually, in some of the protocol synopsis, there were I mean to say comments that it's not it's still in the technical language, and which needs to be converted into the lay language, and that's where the lay version's protocol synopsis came.
Oops, I'm sorry. Does it need to be in a technical language?
No.
No.
That's the point.
But to Leon's point, I think generally protocol synopses are more technical than a lay person would understand.
Yeah, and the current audience for the synopsis is indeed your regulatory reviewer or your ethics committee member or your investigator, right? Let me get a quick gist of this protocol. I'll read the synopsis, but this layperson's synopsis is intended for a vastly different audience, as I understand.
So I'm going to jump us to the next conversation, which is happening in the chat for those of you who aren't watching. So we've all agreed 227 isn't the right place for either of these things. And then Vittoria's come up with a suggestion, which is 314, which is actually very interesting to think about. These are, because it's public registration, documents related to public registries.
Are they asking us to publish them on those sites or just to submit them with our submissions?
I'm assuming to submit them with the submissions, but they will become public because CTIS is public.
Yeah, they're public, not ours. Right.
Yeah, they're public. Yeah.
But they are not
why I would
associated with trial approval.
Right.
I really think we're overcomplicating this.
Yeah.
I mean, in all honesty, my users hear the name lay protocol synopsis, they're going to look at the artifact protocol synopsis and they're going to expect to find it there. It's the same thing for the CSR. If they say CSR, we have an artifact, we happen to have added a sub-artifact called CSR synopsis, they're going to look there for it. I don't know that, I mean, anybody can interpret, you know, protocol public registration is indeed the purpose of that document, but our users are not going to go there for it. They're not going to say lay protocol synopsis, public registration. They're going to go to protocol synopsis. My users, they want it simple, and that's exactly how they're going to go. So we're filing it under protocol synopsis, and the lay CSR is being filed under lay CSR, you know, keeping it simple.
Meredith, I think you've won the audience over. Don't worry. The chat, it goes agree. But you know what? That's the whole point of today, is for us to have this discussion, so we can come out and say, as a group of experts, this is where we think. So I'm very comfortable. So thank you, Meredith. But I think, and sorry, Vittoria, but it's good to bring these up because I think we should be challenging. That's the whole point of this, is that we should be challenging where things go. Okay. I just so you know, we are absolutely not going to get through all of this today. Oh God. Okay, right. Okay. Quick question, Russell. Do you want me to carry? Do you want to carry on with these, or?
I'm happy for you to carry on if you want to.
The only thing
that's absolutely fine.
I can.
No, we've time limited. Yeah.
Yeah, I can flick between the reference model and that. So, but is batch certification anything new?
No, that's not new, and now it's not even part of CTIS.
Isn't it?
We don't see that.
There is a requirement for the batch certification by the qualified person to be made available by the sponsor at the request of the member states concerned.
Yes.
So the question here is this something that we now put into the trial master file, or is it something that resides outside of the trial master file?
So currently in part 1 and part 2, it's not there, but yes, you are right. The member state can request with the additional information of this one. So it's just to see if it's there currently or not. But
our question is, do we need to have this in the trial master file now? Do we need a new artifact, sub artifact for that? Where would people normally keep that information? And is it readily available?
The QP certification?
QP certification is where we.
Yeah, we tend to keep that separate from the ETMF. We just refer within the ETMF.
Yeah, we do
separately.
keep it, but it's in another. It's not in our primary TMF.
I think this one is much more a question of, would you have it in the trial master file, or would you leave it outside of the system, and would it still be readily available?
Hi, this is Juicy from Böhringer Ingelheim. So so we don't have it in the TMF, but like we have one EDMS system, and the QP certifications are maintained outside of the TMF. We don't have it even part as a TMF, so we have it in a quality section of our EDMS.
Just in case if anybody wants to see it, section 624, which are having certificate of analysis and batch records. So batch certificates can go there if they want, if they are filing there.
Yep.
Do we need to do any changes to that?
I don't think so.
I don't think so either.
Okay, great. The next one that we had on the list was using the summary of product characteristics as an investigator brochure. It's whether anything needs to change.
And I think this is a challenging one, Karen, because this really relates to low interventional trials, which is a new category of trial. And on that basis, if you're running a real world study, you would use the SMPC rather than having an IB. No,
that's not new. Yeah, that's in the risk adapted document that EMA published some years ago, though.
Okay.
I think the whole low interventional trials is a separate conversation for another day.
Would you also be using SMPCs for certain AXMPs?
Yes, yeah, that's correct. For
if the product is on the market.
Auxiliary IMPs and which are in market use SMPCs, yeah.
Okay, there's no change required there. People stop me if I'm going too fast. So the next one that I wanted to look at or mention was IMPD. And the only reason I'm mentioning IMPD is for anybody who has been involved in the TMF reference model for a long time will know that the IMPD was discussed. It was in, it was out, it was in, it was out, it was roundabout, and then it was out, and now it's back in. It's in 211. I don't think anything needs to change. It's there as a sub artifact as far as I'm concerned. If people want to put it there, they can put it there. And if they don't, they don't.
Fine.
Great, no comments. Marvelous.
The only thing for IMPD is now it is split into two, IMPD quality and IMPD safety and efficacy. So in case if you want to include sub-artifacts, IMPD safety and efficacy and quality as a two separate options.
Are they always two different documents, Manan?
Yes.
Yes.
Now onwards, yes.
Definitely.
From CTIS, yes.
Ah, interesting. So what do people think about having that as two sub-artifacts? Do you think we need to?
I think if it's written IMPD, we can just leave it general.
Yeah, and you would file anything.
You know, the TMF is not just for EU, it's global.
Indeed.
Yeah, but IMPD is
It's only for Europe, right?
Yeah, indeed. And you can still use metadata if you want to distinguish.
Yeah.
Okay, we will actually later. We'll make, obviously we'll get all the notes from this, so we'll still take it to the formal change control board, etc., to work out as a potential, I think. But it sounds like not from this group.
Okay. Only if there's different owners, different timelines, any of that from other sort of life cycle management perspective, not from the classification, I think.
Okay, Sorry, I was just looking at the notes. Maria, you had a comment about SMPC being kept where IB is. So on the basis it's already in the reference model, if there's a place that you can put suggested changes to the reference model, and I can definitely get you that if you wanted to make that suggestion. But
is that more of an explanatory note that we need to add to the reference model, though, Karen?
Might be, yeah.
No, that's more of a where do you put it? It's like IMPD, where do you put it?
Yeah.
It used to be in the reg zone, then it went to the zone 2, and then it went back and forward and back and forward. Sorry, I'm trying to keep us on track. So the next question is around the pharmacovigilance reporting, annual safety reports, and I tried to read the regulation about pharmacovigilance, and I have to say I think I fell asleep in my coffee. But does anybody think there's any changes that are required as a result, specifically as a result of the changes in reporting? Because you've got a lot of places to put documents in, but does anyone think there are new sub-artifacts required?
So this directly relates, Karen, to the requirement to record unexpected events that affect the risk-benefit balance of the clinical trial. So that's not been needed before. So that's why we've got that in the list potentially as a new document. It's not your standard SAE, CSARs, and so on and so forth. It's specifically a document that covers the unexpected events that affect the benefit risk balance of the clinical trial.
Anyone doing anything specific with them? Anyone think we need a new sub-artifact?
No, I think now ASR and DSU are already in 712.
This comes close to urgent safety measures that do raise questions from end users where to put them.
For urgent safety measures, we have notifications separately. Where should, if it arises, it should go there. But this is a normal annual safety report where we file DSURs.
Anybody else? Anyone got any requirements?
It's Paula speaking. Is moving to just not to country level, but even on T level, because my understanding is that annual safety reports are done once in CTIS for all the countries, no more country level.
Yeah.
But this report is specifically at a trial level.
Yeah.
So the risk balance, risk benefit balance at the trial level, not at a country level.
But it will also, your filing level will depend on your TMF and your study. If you have a study that's not just in the EU and that report is generated for the EU, it's not necessarily a trial level document if the information is not submitted elsewhere.
Yeah.
Well, I think that's a very important question, which is, you're running a country in 5 countries outside the EU plus the EU. Do you put the EU? And I think that becomes more of a technology thing, which is, do you have something that is a region?
Karen, could you please scroll down to the safety section?
Yep.
I think we may need an artifact there for annual safety report or safety report.
Right?
What artifact would it go with? It's not a line listing necessarily. It's an analysis as well, right?
It is.
And so that's why database line listing doesn't work for me necessarily in 7. Now, all of that being said, we don't file any safety information in our primary eTMF system. It's kept in our PV systems, but as an abstract discussion.
Yeah, because absolutely, Noreen, the whole thing here is that this is the overarching umbrella of TMF documents. regardless of where they're filed. This is not about your system. So my knowledge on safety documentation is very low. Would the annual safety report for 712 be sufficient at a trial level?
It's Alvin here. So I think that if, depending on how you look at it, but if the one that this here would trigger substantial modification, that's, I think, what this would do, right? That's so it is a new event that I don't think we are tracking. The annual one is a time-based one that just is done annually. This one is the trigger of substantial modification. So it's not that these have not occurred before, but they have not been required to be tracked. Because this would be followed by a substantial modification.
So in my initial assessment of the mapping, Karen, I had this down as 724. I'm happy to be convinced that persuaded that that's not the right place for that to go.
So I guess it depends on, are we talking about the event or are we talking about the reporting of the event? Because if it's the event itself, it's in 7. If it's the reporting of the event, it's in 3.
I think it's
so the wording is literally unexpected events. So,
but it says overall it appears to increase reporting obligations by extending the scope to cover unexpected. So to me, it's still the reporting of the events. It's not a special event.
So it's 721. Is that what you're saying?
I would no. I would still think it goes to safety reporting.
Okay.
Can I make a suggestion that we might need to have a little bit more focus? I mean, Leila, obviously you've got a group of experts on the change control board who look at safety. So we will just raise our because I want to make sure we do get through the basics today, because there were a couple of things that were bigger picture things, Martina, that we were going to talk about. One of them was the data field information collation sheet. Where have you gone? There you are.
Here we are. Yeah. So CTIS has extensive requirement of structured data information when uploading documents. So we have to enter these. They have a very complex Excel sheet listing out all the data fields which they want to be populated for on certain occasions in parallel to the CTA or for notifications and for certain events. And so for substantial modifications and whatsoever. And this information needs to be collected somewhere in order to be able to draw this for manual entry into the CTIS. And you want to control this information. This is why we, and we've discussed with others, we are doing this in a document ourselves. So I've heard about various types of companies who are doing differently. We are having an Excel sheet, a smart Excel sheet with macros. Others do have a couple of various different Word documents where they collect the information which is needed to be entered for several occasions into the CTIS. And I really wonder how we are dealing with, would the TMF be the right place to have this document or to manage this document and to keep this, to record what the data field information was that we collected and controlled.
So I guess the question is, are people putting that in their TMF, first of all?
That's the question. So how are you dealing with it? As I said, we would. And we've discussed with 2 larger CROs who are doing work for us, they would do as well. Organizing it a little bit differently. So what is your plans? And if yes, if this is being organized in the TMF, what would be the right location for mapping.
Anybody putting that data field information collation sheet into the TMF?
No, so we, like she mentioned, we create Word templates out of it, and we fill those templates, which is to be fed into CTIS, but we keep them in reams actually, not in.
Okay. But you keep them also as well.
Yeah, exactly. We keep, because they take the template and fill the details into it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I guess so. The question is not, do you keep it in your TMF? The question is, do you keep it? And if the answer is yes, and you had everything in TMF,
I believe they will be keeping, because it's a multi-stakeholder document. You need input from many stakeholders, so that document has to be completed in order to fill the data or metadata in CTIS, unless all stakeholders sit together and fill the data directly in CTIS.
Anyone else got any thoughts on this about keeping it and where you'd keep it?
I wonder if the RIM systems will eventually evolve to capture it directly without the need for a document.
A lot of this information is coming from clinical. So I'm not sure whether the RIM system is in all cases really the right system, because most of the clinical stuff usually has access to the TMF, but not necessarily to the RIM system.
Mm-hmm.
This space for us is continuing to evolve. So we're still moving into our third phase of taking the processes, which currently, Martina, we do the same thing. We capture it in an Excel sheet. We use this as a template, and it's manually entered. But what are those data points that are mostly coming from clinical that could be part of our new application or something that we can configure? So in August, we'll be able to say we've tested this and this is what we're going to implement process-wise versus technology-wise. But for now, we're still kind of in that discovery phase of what do we want to try out, looking at where the effort is, the various stakeholders, to Manan's point.
So if you were to, have you decided somewhere where you would put it if you wanted to keep that completed template?
Probably clinical.
So clinical TMF or outside
Correct.
the TMF?
Well, it's CTMS, so
yeah.
It would be the data fields within that. And then if we wanted to pull a report that's specific to CTR, we already have some tag. I don't remember the technical term, but we do have tags for documents that are related to CTR. So when we do pull reports, we can pull reports on anything related to CTR. And we're trying to implement that in our processes for that next phase. Kind of remember to tag your documents, or is there a way for us to tag these artifacts themselves as CTR artifacts, CTR data points, etc.
Okay. Sounds like we don't really have an answer on that one, and on the basis that we don't have a vast amount of time left, I'm just going to pull up one more, which was very quickly, and I've seen a few answers that have already come in on that. The not for publication versus the publication. Meredith, I think you mentioned it, but somebody else, I can't remember who, commented that you would put them in your TMF both in the same artifact. It's just whether, and then maybe I'm assuming use some sort of metadata to distinguish between them. But the question is, are you putting those both versions into your TMF?
I was indeed agreeing with someone else. We are putting them in the TMF, but we're putting them primarily in the TMF from an ease of organizing the documentation to be submitted perspective. We don't necessarily think, well, this is my personal opinion. I don't personally think that those redacted documents are eTMF necessarily. We have the full version in the TMF, but for in terms of how our organization is structured and the roles and responsibilities that have been defined for compiling the submissions and importing the documents into CTIS, the redacted versions are going in our eTMF tool, and so they're going in the same classification. We have added a metadata to indicate that it's the redacted document. But if we had not added that metadata, it would be simple enough. In any case, it's in the title convention because we have chosen to include it in the naming convention in CTIS to distinguish between the documents. So we have the information in 2 locations.
Anyone got any other? Sorry?
Just to confirm with her, Meredith, that we also do the same. So we are just keeping wherever we are filing, but now it is having 4 versions of document. One is redacted, non-redacted, translated, and English. But it's clearly shown into our naming convention, but there is no other difference.
Okay.
Not to mention the redacted translated. Simplification. Yeah. Simplification. Let's simplify.
Yeah.
So we have nearly reached the end of our 2 hours, and we had a whole bunch of other topics that we sort of had talked about. Russell, do you want to do 1 minute on those 3 topics, and we will.
I'll try to squash this all into a minute, Karen. So, with regard to the regulations, it does talk all the way through about the clinical trial master file. I think we're much more used to regulations that talk about the trial master file and the investigator site file. I think those, for very good reason, we have a Chinese wall between the 2, and I think that's going to have to remain. It's literally just to bring that to your attention that the regulations do talk about the clinical trial master file rather than referring to the investigator site file as well. In terms of co-sponsorship, the regulations require a single sponsor to be identified as having responsibility for the clinical trial. If you're co-sponsoring, you will need to make sure that all parties involved in that have written agreements detailing their respective responsibilities for the clinical trial master file. We've already discussed retention, records retention. We now have very usefully a retention period of 25 years for all of your clinical study documentation. So that'll be for the trial master file as a whole, plus any other documentation you have in ancillary or supporting systems. But there is also the acknowledgement within the regulation that things like informed consent can now be taken using different forms of media. So things like social media and video and other types of recordings can be used. And if we're going to have to keep all of that information for 25 years, that is more challenging to keep that kind of media than it is to keep standard documentation and data. So be aware of the restrictions or challenges that you're going to have to make sure that that information that you record on any different types of media remains accessible, readable, and usable throughout the entire retention period, so for the whole 25 years. I did put in that one final point around clinical trials and low interventional studies. I think potentially the trial master file reference model real world studies document index is going to be a better model for you for using for low interventional studies, but that really is a completely different discussion, and I think we may have another workshop on low interventional studies and the relationship between them and clinical trials as very distinct types of study, a trial being a subset of a clinical study. So Karen and I are going to talk about perhaps getting together, perhaps Stuart McCulley, to discuss that at a, thank you, Victoria, at another date in the future. I'm sure we'll garner some interest for that. So that's a very quick run through, mindful of the time that we have left, limited time we have left. Thank you, Carol.
No problem at all. And I have to say that there's lots of questions going on. So thank you for everybody chatting to each other. I have one question. Compliance with biological samples. Meredith, is that a new thing from the EU CTR, or is that just a question?
It's a new thing from the EU CTR, and I asked it in the forums because I can't, it's obviously zone 8. But I don't see an obvious artifact in zone 8, and the closest thing I can see is manual, but it's not really a manual. When you look at the template, it's a description of the kinds of samples that are going to be stored, how they're going to be processed, et cetera, et cetera. So it's kind of like a sample management plan, but we don't have a plan artifact in zone 9 necessarily, sorry, in zone 8 necessarily. So for now, we're going to put it in manual for now, for lack of a better option, but maybe should I submit it to the change control board?
Well, I'm taking all the notes from this, so I think what we'll do is we'll collate the whole lot back as one big sort of section, because that's the other thing. And the other thing is, I'm sorry, Vanessa, what is an AXMP?
That's the auxiliary item.
Yes, auxiliary medicinal product.
Okay.
And we also have authorized and unauthorized ones, right? So
yes,
how would that go into?
I do think there's something in the Q&A document on EU 536/2014 that talks about auxiliaries. I will do some work on that and look into that for you and get back to you.
So I'm going to just very quickly, I realize we're losing people fast and furious. So I just want to say thank you very much to everybody who attended. It is recorded. I think we might need to redo this again, as in if everybody is interested, we could do another, not redo this session, but do another session. Yes, the recording will be available, and it's obviously a very hot topic. I'm just very pleased that so many of you attended and that it seemed to have some really good discussions. So great, thank you very much. I've learned a lot today. And I will, Russell, Martina, thank you very much. And what we'll do is we will I think have a chat about maybe doing another one of these.
That was great. Thank you everyone who contributed today. It's been brilliant.
Yeah, absolutely.
I just had a point for the compliance, there are two compliance added. One is like mentioned biological sample and compliance statement for data protection. So these two are the statement. If I think we don't have that in reference model.
So we need something for the compliance for data protection. And Manon, I'm going to get you involved in the next one of these, definitely.
Yeah. Okay.
And yes, Victoria, we'll have a look at research collaboration. Thank you for the suggestion.
All our dirty laundry.
Yeah, good to wear it occasionally.
You know, work from home.
Brilliant.
Gosh, well, okay. Well, I think we've got quite a lot from today. I think we've Meredith, thank you very much for your input as well. That was great.
Oh, thank you.
Very clear.
I think that was a lot more successful than we thought it might have been, actually. So that's brilliant.
Well, the problem was we sort of came into it with all of us being a little bit, well, me being completely in the dark about it. I just knew that everybody wanted to talk about it. So I thought, okay, let's talk about it then.
Yeah, and I think there is so little exchange about what we are doing in the various settings, about how to organize us with EU CTR. As I said, I don't think it's so much different that we really have lots of new documents, but it is the way how we manage the complexity and the way how we interact with this new system in the EMA. That's something where I have the feeling everyone is trying to do their best, but sometimes it might have been better to exchange to save each of us a little bit of effort.
I totally agree. Russell, you're probably going to have to update your HSRAA white paper.
I will.
Yeah.
In my defense, I wrote it in 2015.
Oh God, it was brilliant. Absolutely. No, don't worry. It was brilliant. It was just there's a lot of input in here. So there's a couple of new things that I've gathered from today. So right, I think we should probably, as this very unofficially calling this to a close. It's not exactly a formal thing.
It's very useful discussion. This is a very difficult. I mean, if we tackle it individually as organizations, there's so much going on, and I think that the getting together here really appreciated, because something are changing, some things are not, and so appreciate the expert opinions.
Okay.
Absolutely. Well, thanks very much, Martina and Russell, and lovely to see you, Victoria, twice in one day.
Twice a day, exactly.
Have a good rest of the day, everyone.
Andrew, thanks a lot.
Oh,
Cheers.
my dog is joining me. Right. Okay. Thanks,
Bye.
everybody. Bye.
Bye.
Thanks, bye.
Bye.